Greetings, and welcome to Extra Time here in Spanish Harlem. I'm Matt Doyle in the big chair, filling in for Andrew Wiebe, who's off in Europe. Always with me, my partners in soccer. To my left, Dr. Vibes himself, Tom Bogert. How you doing, Tom?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
To my right, second week in a row,
That's right.
Calen Carr, back in the saddle.
Great to be here, man.
Yeah.
Congrats to Tom, by the way. The big news.
The big scoop of the weekend, Tom. Fill in the listeners who maybe don't follow.
Up the
There's
scoops.
how many Extra Time listeners do you think don't follow Tom on Twitter? There's maybe like 2 guys out there. Go ahead.
I got engaged yesterday. It was a beautiful day. Me and my lovely fiance got to spend it with our families as well. Did it on the beach because, again, it had to be on brand. So that was nice. And
You're a beach guy.
yeah. I live on Ocean Ave. So then when we were at the beach, my family and her family went back to our apartment to surprise her when we got back. So that was was very lovely.
Was there ever a moment of like real nervousness and doubt for you? Like, oh man,
How
like
confident.
I might sky this PK. This one might end up in the 30th row.
No doubt. There was no doubt. Nervousness, of course, because it's like, what do I do with my hands all day? It's like, what do you do in the morning that you're going to propose? Like, you can't act like weird, obviously, or like, I wanted to have champagne there, but obviously couldn't walk to the beach with, like, I'm sure she knew what was up, but if I was walking with a bottle of champagne, that might give it away a little bit too.
Wait a minute, you're not usually walking with a bottle.
No, it would be a Miller High Life. So.
Champagne and beers.
Exactly. So that would have been fun. That should have been the bit. So here you go. So I was like, am I going to have to go bury it in the sand and just hope somebody doesn't take it? But thankfully the company that I used for the proposal were setting up some stuff. I was like, hey, I'm the guy that is doing it here.
Wait,
can
so
you put this somewhere?
This is a company that actually specializes in setting up scenes, I guess?
Yes. Yeah. So it's like they bill themselves as like a luxury picnic thing. So it's like people will have like dinners or others, like picnic, whatever, on the beach or wherever. And one of their things were proposals. I was like, that's great. Like, because I wanted to do it on the beach anyway. I was like, all right, this feels like that's cliche. That it is cliche, I admit. But I was like, all right, I can do a little bit more with the picnic, and then again layer off the surprises after that with people coming back to the apartment without her knowing, and that was great.
Nice, very nice.
How long until you checked your phone on Twitter?
Yeah, it's like, actually, hold on. I think I'm getting a call here.
Did you think about potentially handing me the login just to tweet through this?
Live tweets. No, I got a text from somebody who was like, I obviously wasn't on my phone much after it happened and was with family and stuff. And I saw my phone and someone was like, hey man, like, are you around? Like, I need to give you a quick call. I'm a little busy right now, bro. Just sent back a picture. It's like, oh my God.
Tom sent me a text yesterday, and I knew this was happening, right? I knew that the proposal, I think we all knew the proposal was happening this weekend. And Tom sends me a text yesterday, I want to say around 5-6 o'clock. And he's like, are you around tonight? I'm going to FaceTime you later. And I was like, oh my God, she said no. Like, oh my God, he's gonna and he's gonna be a wreck, and I'm gonna have to tell him everything's gonna be I
lie to him and tell him it's gonna be okay.
My heart was in my throat because I thought that's why. And then of course FaceTime, and she's there too, and she's showing off the ring, and she looked beautiful, and Tom had his hair he looked really nice. It's like, oh okay. So it was a good weekend for the folks here in Extra Time. Wiebe, as I said, in Portugal on vacation, a well-earned 14th vacation of the year for Andrew Wiebe. David Goss is in Dubai, I believe, with his lovely bride for the Dubai NBA game. Yeah, that's some traveling right there, and I think they're going to end up going to Portugal on the back half of this trip. Everybody's going. We're still here in New York, though. Yeah, we got a job to do.
Somebody's got to work.
MLS had a job to do this weekend. It was match day 37, the penultimate full match day of this pretty wild and pretty weird MLS season. Best things we saw, I'm going to start off with that one. Brian Vera. It was a goal that was ultimately kind of meaningless. It was 3-0 at the time, Sporting Kansas City in RSL, up a man. Brian Vera pounces on a poorly cleared. It was from a corner. Yeah. From about 25 or 30, 35 yards out, and he takes a touch and lashes it left-footed, upper 90. I'll still be thinking about. I know that I'll still be thinking about this goal 10 years from now because I immediately thought of Jimmy Traore's goal in CONCACAF Champions League from 10 years ago for the Sounders. Now that was a much bigger goal. It was a goal that came in a win, and it was a sort of a landmark win for the. But like, you have to make a deal with the devil to strike a ball that perfectly. I think you only get to strike a ball that perfectly once in your entire life. And for Brian Vera, unfortunately, it came in a loss, but my God, what a banger.
Speaking of deals with the devil, I think that for you to be so good at content around MLS, your deal with the devil is you're sitting here. I know I'm going to be thinking about this meaningless Brian Vera goal in 10 years from now because I was thinking about this other goal from 10 years ago. And I'm sure that there was one in 2002 that's somewhere in the back of your head that you're like, oh, that reminds me.
It's actually the D-Row free kick from 2005. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's
2003, 2002, 2003. Well, I think about the Pescadito game winner in MLS Cup pretty often from 2002. 2003 didn't have a lot of great goals.
Wait, by the way, so Carlos Ruiz Pescadito was on our show on last Wednesday, and I asked him about the nickname Pescadito, and I was like, it's one of those things I never thought, why are you called the fish? I thought maybe because the way he played, or some of his style of play, or he's tough to grab a hold of, or whatever it might be. But he was just like, no, everything else was taken in my neighborhood in Guatemala. It's just like, there was already like a snake, there was already a chicken, and so fish was all that was left. So
did he give any updates on whether the snake or the chicken made it pro like he did?
I didn't ask. I didn't follow. That's a good follow-up, Tom. I like that. No, I'm pretty sure he had to be the most successful.
Yeah, I would reckon.
Pretty
safe
about
bet on that one.
Yeah.
Tom, what was the best thing you saw this weekend, soccer related?
Soccer related. It was Denny Bouanga, I guess, extending it to the week. Denny Bouanga taking a chokehold on the Golden Boot race. He had 5 goals over 2 games. He's one of the most fun players to watch in this league. He's somebody who, like, he's not a center forward. He's not, would you call finishing even like his top 3 skill, right? Like, probably not. Like, he can strike a ball excellently. His pace, his dribbling, those are the first 3 things I think of, and not finishing. And he's, 90 minutes away from winning his second Golden Boot of the season because he won Golden Boot in the CONCACAF Champions League. And he might have won Golden Boot in the Leagues Cup if he got to play in the group stage because he had 6 goals in like 300 minutes.
True,
like, this has been an unreal season for Denny Bouanga. Oh, and by the way, jetting off to Africa for international duty with the Gabon. Again, this isn't going around CONCACAF. That's a whole long flight. He played in a game after getting off an airplane earlier this season and scored. Came off the bench for LAFC. He's just been incredible. He's in the MVP race, and because I think it'd be disingenuous to not say that. I'm still gonna barring something crazy happening. I think Lucho Acosta is gonna get my vote, but Denny might be second. And being an MVP finalist, Golden Boot winner, these are all huge things. And this is, I don't know. I remember we sat here this time last year, or even 13 months ago, right after he signed. It's we're all talking about Gareth Bale, we're all talking about Chiellini, we're all talking about Christian Teo, and I kept on coming back to look at this guy's profile, look at their track record of identifying players in their prime and how well that they've done. And Denny Bouanga's shattered all sorts of expectations. He's the best player on this team. And LAFC fans have seen insane seasons from wingers, Carlos Vela and Diego Rossi for the last 5 years, essentially, whenever they've been around. And this goes up there with them. So his big week, another few goals. He's just been awesome.
Is it a disappointment for LA? And I'm already digressing, so I really am sitting in Weeby's chair, man. Is it a disappointment for LAFC this year if they don't win a trophy? Because they got to the final of CCL, they lost that. They lost Campeones Cup. They had that 2-0 lead over Monterrey in Leagues Cup, and they fell on their faces. They faded out of the Supporter Shield race. They lost in the Open Cup, I want to say quarters? No, it was round of 16.
Yeah, but they played their
yeah, but they still lost to the Galaxy.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, look, maybe this sounds like loser mentality, but I don't think it's that binary. I think, maybe if they flame out in the first round, you'll call it a disappointment, but they've been pretty excellent and entertaining. Not probably their best versions of themselves. They got to a CCL final. They made a little run in the Leagues Cup. They've been relevant in MLS. Even when they've been struggling, they're second in the Western Conference. I think this has been a really, really good year. And it's almost kind of a transitional one, weirdly, because they had to, take apart a decent chunk of the MLS Cup winning team and a decent chunk of I don't know, you go back to 2019. I think Vela is the only player left from that team.
Yeah.
Right? And now they're retooling this on the fly, and all the while they're one of the best teams in the league. So yeah, like the answer should be, we only play for trophies. What's the point if we're not doing this? But like, I can't sit here and say it'd be a disappointment if they don't win MLS Cup.
They're one of the, I'd say, top 8 or 10 must-watch teams every week, and that might be even underselling it.
Yeah.
One note about this LAFC attack: the young kid Christian Oliveira, the Uruguayan U22 initiative, right? His underlying numbers starting to look a lot like Denny Bouanga's, where he's 5 or 6 years younger than him. He had a goal this weekend off a rebound of Bouanga's shot. LAFC just stuffed Austin in a body bag and ended their season. We'll have more on that game later. Calen, over to you. What's the best thing you saw this weekend? I'm
going to go over to the Eastern Conference and look at Orlando. Orlando's 3-2 win at home over New England. This just team keeps on rolling, coming in with a ton of momentum heading into the playoffs. New England, on the other side, sliding, lost at home their first time to Columbus and then go on the road to Orlando. Difficult place to play, but Duncan McGuire with another goal. I think it's 11th of the season.
It's 11 in MLS. I think it's
13 altogether.
13 all because he had 2 in Leagues Cup.
Yeah, but anything from wide areas was, this team is so dangerous getting forward. Rafael Santos, and then on the right side, Thoralson, right?
Thoralson, yeah.
Daggerdan, yeah. And then Facu Torres, again, with a really nice finish, coming back to it.
14 goals.
14 for him, yeah. And Gulo, I think, had the assist on that one. So, it's making me think about this Orlando team as legit title contenders. Of course, we've seen what they've done in knockout tournaments in the past, last year winning the Open Cup, and then also I thought really impressive in CONCACAF Champions League earlier in the year. Lost to Tigres but pushed them to the limit. And then also, it's difficult to say the Leagues Cup, but at the same time I thought they showed a lot against that Inter Miami side that was just we saw what they did. So I think this team is running. It's making me ask questions about Oscar Pareja as well. That's kind of the interesting wrinkle or story to me that's still kind of hanging out there, is that he doesn't have a new contract as far as
potentially the number 1 free agent in MLS.
I was going to say
winter would be Oscar Pareja.
And it's kind of one of those things where the fact that it's gone to the end of the season at this point, now maybe you just wait until the end to see how it goes.
Yeah.
But if I'm him, I remember I spoke to him once right when the news broke that his contract wasn't out or it was becoming more of a conversation. And he just said, all the coach things that you're supposed to say, I'm just focused on the rest of the season and all that. But since then, it's gone incredibly well for Orlando to the point where he's no longer, seems like, playing for his job. He's now maybe potentially has the leverage, right? And then maybe some other suitors. So as we've looked across the league, and we're going to get to a bunch of stories around coaches being let go and open jobs and vacancies, and Tom has a great article out on The Athletic, plug right there for my golden boot buddy. But yeah, he's a name now where I'm saying, okay, well, Orlando needs to do everything they can to try to keep him, and there might be some other teams that might have an eye out that he could be a good fit for.
Yeah, and real quick, because I know I've said this a few times on the show, written in The Athletic a couple of times, and definitely tweeted about it, but just to reiterate, not only is Oscar Pareja out of contract at season's end, sporting director Luis Muzi, there's a mutual contract option for 2024, meaning both he and the front ownership have to opt in. Ditto for their number 2 in the front office, Ricardo Moreira. All 3 of these people absolutely will have suitors. Like, I can say that factually. Like, this isn't speculation. That if they are on the open market, they will have suitors. And so they're at a point where this is, again, another new best season for Orlando, I guess, in terms of points and everything else qualified.
60 points for the first time in club history.
They won their first ever trophy last year. And like, before Muzi, Moreira, and Pareja came in, this team never made the playoffs. And now they're perennial playoff contenders, or team, maybe not a contender last year or anything, but they won the trophy. They've been getting to the playoffs every single year. Like, it's a resounding success for all 3 of these people. And again, even earlier in the year, we were having discussions with Oscar about I don't know, we kind of want something more out of this attack. Like, it seems like they have more talent than what they're playing up to. And it's weird because I think we all really rate Oscar Pareja. And like, now that's what they're doing again. And like Calen said, it's like the leverage has shifted all the way into Oscar Pareja. Again, he should be the top coaching candidate on the market. I think it's him and Gio, and then everybody else. And like, they will probably set the market, and that's the domino effect of they get to pick their jobs rather than somebody else. So like, again, this is a really big story that I think we should be talking about it more. We're talking about it enough. Like, I'm talking about it every show if we could.
Well, let's keep talking about it. Oscar Pareja and that entire front office sort of brain trust, potentially out of contract. Also, potentially, they would have to replace Facu Torres, who I'm assuming has, 8-figure European suitors coming this winter. Duncan Maguire, I think you had reported earlier in the year that Anderlecht were interested. Yeah. I imagine it's bigger clubs than that now. I don't think Ivan Angulo, but certainly Cesar Araujo at defensive midfield, the young Uruguayan. They have a lot of guys who are have the profile of sort of the new MLS. Yeah. Right? Like, because this is Messi's MLS in a lot of ways, and we will talk about him in a little bit, but it's also Thiago Almada's MLS, and it's the MLS that Miguel Almiron made, and it is an MLS where the best players in the Americas come to showcase themselves for the best and biggest and richest clubs in Europe, and that pipeline is well and truly open. And we've already seen Orlando City benefit from that in certain ways, Daryl Dike being the big one. But the building up players like Facu Torres and Araujo, like this is something that we've seen from Oscar Pareja at literally all his steps, going all the way back to Colorado a decade ago. When he took a young and unheralded team, and I think he had them second in the West and in his second year, and then he left for Dallas, and we know what he did in Dallas. And after a little sojourn to Tijuana, here he is in Orlando City. So with all that said, getting all these guys on the same page, it took a while. But they're there now. 10-2-2 since July 1st. As Calen said, they were very good in the Leagues Cup, even with that loss to Miami. What strikes me about it is they're doing it all without it's tough to define one particular thing and say that this is what Orlando do. They play just as much up the right channel as they do up the left channel. It's Santos on the left side, or it's Daggerdan on the right side. Duncan Maguire scores pure center forward goals, but he does it on fewer touches than like Brian White does. Facu Torres, I think the one thing that we've seen is he's released a little higher, a little earlier in the build out, so that he's getting more touches in the box than he did the first half of the season. And this team, with the way they're constructed, with the way they're playing, with what they've done over the past, they are S-tier contender for MLS Cup. Are they the second? They're the second best team in the league. Are they the second best team in the league?
That's playoff success and regular season success are two different things.
And playoff success has kind of eluded.
Yeah.
Oscar Pareja.
And we have talked about this on the show, so this isn't something new, but I think that this team is set up well for playoff success as well, because what you need is a strong defense. They have that. What you would like to have is a goalkeeper who can be a match winner. I know he had a mistake this weekend, but I still view him as one of the better goalkeepers in the league. They have the individual talent in attack. Like Facu Torres did this in the Open Cup final. He's not exactly some other teams will have Lucho Costa and Thiago Almada, so he's maybe not that apex predator level, but I think he's enough to be the best player on a team that goes through a knockout round. So this team, I wouldn't flat out call them second. I would do it in tiers as well, where I think Cincy are the favorites, but I think Orlando are in that next group when you put them with, Philly and maybe Columbus and St. Louis and LAFC and Seattle. I think that they're very much in that bracket. So this is a very real possibility that they're going to challenge. And if they do go out early in the playoffs, that'll be a very big disappointment.
Calen?
Yeah, I think they've got a real chance. And it's partly, the funny part is it felt like part of the frustration maybe with Pareja was that they wanted more of a free-flowing attack or high marks of getting forward and scoring a ton of goals. And ultimately, the big shift for me when I watched this Orlando team towards the back half of the season was playing the 2 6s together, putting Cartagena and Araujo as the Araujo. We had Araujo. Yeah, sorry. Together, and I think that's given them a much stronger baseline. Antonio Carlos hasn't been healthy. If they could get him back, I feel like that would be even bigger.
Robin Jansson's been amazing.
Robin Jansson's been great, and Schlegel is there, but I worry a little bit sometimes about Schlegel in.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, as far as just, the mistakes or taking risks, especially in the playoffs as the margins get tighter. But I think putting those 2 6s right in front of them has really protected that back line. And then that also provides more of like some freedom for Santos and Dagger Dan to get forward on the outside. I wasn't sure if I was going to pick that one up, but that's a part of my lexicon now. But yeah, I think they're right in it. I agree. I probably still, if you were to like really force me, I'd probably take Philadelphia if we're just going over the East as far as which team do I trust more to go and challenge Philadelphia, to challenge Cincinnati. I'd probably still pick them, but I would put, 1A, 2, 1B right there, right next to them. And I think they've got a real chance and partly because of Pareja's style and that he has not tried to, before it was like Mauricio Pereira was playing a little bit more as that deeper position. And now he's playing a more advanced role, which is a much better place for him and his progression in this part of his career. So I think that shift to get those two together has happened. The one thing I would say is when you mention the players potentially leaving, in general, the windows for success in MLS have gotten much smaller to me.
God, yeah.
And so the ability to rebuild, to find new players, and to try to do it. I mean, even if you just look at their last match against New England, like that's a perfect example of a team that has had to try to shift. They've sold their goalkeeper mid-season to Chelsea. It's like it's very difficult. A couple injuries here and there, and you're out, or you moved on. They've tried to withstand that. Barrero goes out. They try to get Shankale in. He's great. But the margins are the windows for these teams to really make a run. So for Orlando's perspective, they really got to take a push at it because this is their moment right now.
Orlando, their final game of the season, decision day, at Toronto FC. So
who have just clinched the wooden spoon. Congratulations
Toronto. Congratulations to David Goss, who I believe had Toronto in the...
Probably non-ironically. He probably did that for the Canadian Championship and playoff success.
Yeah, them in the extra time trophy draft. So I think that's David's first trophy of the year. Well done to David Goss in Toronto FC.
We're finishing last in that. I did not have a good
I think you guys are getting shut out in that one.
No, yeah, there's no chance.
We talked about how Luis Muzzi and Ricardo Moreira are free agent or have mutual club options for 2024 with Orlando. They might come back. They might not come back. I'm going to read you a press release that hit my inbox at 8:56 p.m. on Saturday night. DC United have announced that the club and head coach Wayne Rooney have mutually parted ways. Quote, "We have spoken with Wayne and agreed it is best for us to part ways at this time. This decision creates the avenue for our next general manager to have the full opportunity to impart a new philosophy and structure onto our sporting operations, which begins with the critical identification of a head coach who will best align with this," said Jason Levian, CEO and essentially investor operator for DC United. "We're grateful to Wayne for all he has done for our club and for soccer in the nation's capital, first as DC United player and captain, and most recently as our coach. He remains an important part of the DC United family and a valued and cherished friend." DC United won 2-0 this weekend over NYCFC, a big 6-pointer. That puts DC above the playoff line, but also eliminated from the playoffs.
I was so confused by this, by the way.
It's MLS heritage, man. It's so good.
I was on the Red Bull match, and they put DC above the playoff line.
With the little E for eliminated.
I didn't see the E, so I was just like, oh, DC above the line. And then I got a text coming through that Tom sent where it's like DC eliminated and above the playoff line. This is amazing. And I was like, I think they're eliminated. So I trust you with my life here. We're on live there. But yeah, very, very strange.
So the reason they're eliminated, they're on 40 points. Chicago and NYCFC have one game left. One of those two teams is guaranteed to end up on 41 points or more. So there is no way DC can finish in the top 9
because DC have a bye in decision day. They're done.
This is it. This was their final game of the season. They played really well.
They did.
There's a 4-4-2 diamond again, even without Christian Benteke, who was an illness scratch, wasn't even on the game day roster. It was Eric Hurtado who started up top.
Also heritage.
Yeah, right. Also correct. Matthias Klick and Chris Durkin got the goals. Those are the two shuttlers in the diamond. Russell Canouse is at the back point. Gabriel Pirani, the young Brazilian, I'm using air quotes, playmaker who's on loan. They have a decision to make on him. I would say, considering that he's in the second percentile of expected assists, maybe look elsewhere for a number 10. But anyway, they played well. They got a win. It is not enough. Rooney is out. Over 48 games, 1.02 points per game in the regular season. That's the second worst points per game in DC history among full-time head coaches, behind only, anyone know? Kurt Anelfo. Way back, I want to say around 2009 or so. It felt like it was coming. I think there were some steps forward this club took in terms of youth player development, but it certainly was not linear. I think Benteke was a really good signing. Yeah. I think Quakes has been very good. But DC were mostly very bad under Wayne Rooney. How do you look at this?
Well, I think, DC's Wayne Rooney's place as a club legend for DC, I think, will remain intact, although his stint as a manager was not a success, I think it's fair to say. I did see some progression from last year to this year. They actually had
50% more points this year. They were 27 points last year, 40 points this year.
And I don't even really pin last year on him. He took over in the summer. He could have done the John Herdman thing and just said, "I'm not taking these L's. I'll see in the offseason. I'll start then." But he started again. If they made the playoffs this year, I think that would have been a good achievement.
By the way, Wayne Rooney already rumored to be with Birmingham. Birmingham just sacked their coach.
Yes, that was.
Do we think that's done?
Very likely that's going to happen.
Right, but that was the risk, right? Always was the minute he comes in, you immediately start thinking, the minute he wants to leave, he's gone, right? And that was always, you knew this was just a temporary. Like most coaches come in and they're looking to stay in for a long time, or you think you can build around them, and it's really more on, you have the fear of saying, okay, well, if you're the manager, you're like, well, how long do I have until I get sacked? And in this case, it was kind of the opposite dynamic, where he came in holding all the cards, all the leverage. If it didn't go well, okay, no problem. If it does go well, I'm probably also going to leave. And so that was the risk that this happened, and why it feels like the structure around it is so lacking. And that's the part that is really frustrating, I would imagine, from a DC United supporters perspective, is that what's the plan heading after that? I would say Wayne Rooney has done a really good job, I think, of developing these young players. At times throughout the early part of the season, he was having to play 3 or 4 of them at the same time.
He played him this weekend.
Yeah, Akambone started there.
16-year-old center back.
And that was the way he started right at the beginning. Yeah. But Cudi Pietro, I think, is the one standout where you can say Wayne Rooney trusted him, played him, developed him. He looks like a real, promising talent.
He should be with the USU 23 team for this camp. I thought he was the one very obvious snub from that roster. Like he's really good.
Yeah, and the biggest thing for me is he has personality, and he brought something a little bit different to this DC team that looked very predictable at time. Even the system that Wayne had set up was oftentimes he shifted it late into the diamond, but he was often playing direct through Benteke, playing long balls. He had the Tyler Miller thing earlier in the year where he was pushing really high because he didn't have any center backs that could turn and run, so they had to play this kind of dangerous system that at times put them in trouble. But Cudi Pietro was the one player that would be able to go off script, try something a little bit different, show that creativity. He had a penchant for finding the big moments. I think Wayne Rooney gave him the trust. So I give him credit on the one hand of saying he has developed young players. He has trusted young players, which has been, I think, a hallmark of his managerial career. But at the same time, he's also brought in some players where you look around and you say, okay, well, some of these players are kind of guys that were Wayne's guys, right? Where you bring over and you say, okay, even Lewis O'Brien, for example, was a really good pickup, I thought, and was a guy that you probably wouldn't get otherwise, but came over, was here for 6 months, and did a really good job. But then it's like, okay, well, he wants to go back, and the club doesn't keep him, and so it's just kind of a stopgap, and that's the way it felt. Like this, a lot of the decisions have been, even Wayne Rooney as a signing, where it's saying, oh, well, we haven't had the success that we've wanted on the field. here's Wayne Rooney, like a club legend, come back to the team, and he's going to immediately make this better, or at least give you a reason to feel some hope about this. But it was always going to be a short-term play, and I think that's the frustrating part for a club that has so much history.
I think I agree with every word you said, but including the fact that Wayne Rooney, I think, did a good job of laying a better groundwork for what's to come next year. And I look at this roster. I did my post. I'm sure you did your postmortem for The Athletic.
I was a little busy yesterday.
Yeah, that's fair. Fair point. I beat Tom to the scoop. I did my postmortem, and just like looking through the roster and looking through the season they had and how the pieces fit and how the young players developed. And look, DC United has not been the biggest spending team over the last 15 years. But they're not at the bottom end of that scale anymore. And they have an open DP slot. And they have shown the willingness to go out and, bring in players who are at or near the top end of the pay scale. And I think that, Benteke's 32. I think he turns 33 later this month. He's still a very, very good striker in this league, a fulcrum of a number 9 who's going to do the honest, dirty running every single game. Kude Pietro, Durkin was good, Knaus was good, Matthias Klick, like Benteke, he's in his mid-30s, but I thought he was very good. Like, there are pieces for this team. I think that this is a desirable job, but I think that what happens. Okay, so
you keep going. I don't want to preempt you, so I'm going to go for a while.
Well, what needs to happen is what Calen said.
Yeah,
you need to go out and get someone who lays the groundwork and sees it as a half decade or more project.
Absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts on this situation. First, with some information and Wayne Rooney came out and said. Let
me add one more thing. DC, that area, that homegrown territory, is a hotbed.
Very good point.
And Loudon, their developmental team, I think they're still in USL, though they might be going to Next Pro. They do a very good job of getting guys ready for the first team. Ryan Martin there. They have some talent in the coaching ranks. They have a lot of talent coming through this homegrown program. It is like they could be right there with Dallas and Philly and the Red Bulls in terms. And in fact, I think this year they might have taken that step and been the team that is the next up for that.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts on the situation, but I'll start with some information. And again, Wayne Rooney was public about his frustrations there wasn't any talks about his future. Again, this was another example of a mutual contract option. And my understanding is that if DC really wanted Wayne back and were proactive about these talks a couple months ago, he could still be here. Again, he's going to take the Birmingham job in all likelihood. That's what it looks like. But he came out and said this publicly about the contract talks because he was genuinely frustrated, because that shows a desire to return. So if the long-term plan or the longer-term plan was for Rooney to stay, they didn't do it. But to be fair to DC, they did that because they don't want to make a decision on the head coach without a new GM coming in and having their say.
Conspicuous in the absence of that press release and in this discussion is the name Dave Casper.
Yes.
He has been he's club president now.
Is he technically a consultant? Because I thought part of the reshuffle. So, and this is where they should be shredded for being in this situation. They parted ways with GM Lucy Rushton October of last year.
Correct.
That is a calendar year. Everybody knows that Wayne Rooney wasn't going to be a 5 to 8 year head coach at this. They hired Carl Robinson to have a coach with MLS head coaching experience on the staff in the event that things went really well and Wayne got a job offer in England in the summer that he couldn't turn down and really, really wanted to leave for. So they were already planning and ready for this to be a shorter term hire, as we all knew it was. And it was an 18-month guaranteed contract. They did not hire a new GM in a year after parting ways with Lucy Rushton. So Wayne Rooney had a lot of say on the roster, which is fine. But going back to Calen's point, this club has just been a series of short-term thinking, short-term decisions. Stopgap here, stopgap there. Oh, Wayne Rooney, you're going to be here for 35 more games. You make all the hiring, the player decisions. You do all of this. And it's obvious to me that the teams that are the most successful in this league have a top-down plan. St. Louis is a phenomenal example of this. Lutz Van Seal took over sporting director. His philosophy is transition, high pressing soccer. Agree with it, disagree. Every single decision was made with that as the starting point. Bradley Cornell, the head coach, that's what he believes in too. These are the players we're going to try to sign. And even if they made bad decisions on players, which they didn't, this was the best case scenario. Even if they made bad decisions on players, the floor is much higher because you're not being pulled in 15 different directions. Think about this DC Rod, like when Benteke came in, and after they spent a lot of money on Taxi Fontes. 2 different players. They can probably play together, but again, it was just another
They can't play together for a coach who wants to play a 4-3-3. Fountas is a second forward. He's not a winger.
Exactly.
You can't play him in midfield. Already, the vision does not fit from player personnel to coaching. And by the way, I just want to point this out. Dave Casper is on the DC United website still as president of soccer operations and sporting director.
Yeah, I mean, again, I do know that Wayne Rooney was leading a lot of this, but and again, it was all like kind of scrambling. And when they took too long to even get fully into the GM search this winter, and I know not a lot's been reported. There's one name that I know that they contacted Orlando for permission to speak with Ricardo Moreira. They were denied. I'm sure that there were other candidates, but by that time it was February. The season started when they made that request. Even if they hired Moreira or somebody else, Click was already signed. All 3 DP spots were used. Ravel Morrison was still on the roster. That, again, a Wayne Rooney signing. And that's, again, one of Wayne Rooney's guys. Of albatross of a signing, both on and off the field.
Victor Paulson.
Victor Paulson was a DP when he was signed last summer. And, like, just kind of going down the line. If you're a GM, why in the world would you have taken that job in March?
Yeah.
Like, why would anybody, like, if I was advising anybody who was interviewed, it's just wait. Like, what are you supposed to do? If you come in March, all of the resources are already spent. A coach is already hired. Like, if they still want you in 6 months, like, maybe think about it then. Like, if they need to hire a GM, and that's why this Wayne Rooney thing went the way it did, because they didn't want to keep making these short-term decisions. And now they're losing Rooney, which again is fine. That was going to happen eventually. So they need to get this GM hire right, and then they need to just kind of get out of the way and let one person cook a plan and stay with it, rather than, oh man, we lost a couple games and now we're going to go in a different direction. Like Hernan Losada and Wayne Rooney, they do not have very much in common at all in their coaching profile. And Hernan Losada made all of their signings were like he was overturning a roster he inherited that didn't fit him from Ben Olsen. And then they signed players to try to high press. He's gone in a year and 4 games. And Wayne Rooney comes in, and now he signs a bunch of players for a different system. And now, what if they go back to another high-pressing coach? Christian Benteke doesn't fit that, right? Like, Mateusz Klich probably does, but he's getting older. And, like, it's just a series of short-term decisions that leads this team to be mid-table. We're bottom of the league last year.
You can also sign... We talked about the short window of players moving. I still think you can do the same with coaches. And as we're seeing now, the window for coaches is getting shorter, right? With the pressure that's increasing in MLS, and then also the profile, I think, of some of these managers as well. And we've seen this happen with Patrick Vieira, Thierry Henry. This is a really good league for players of big name statures to get an opportunity where you actually have a little bit more time to be able to actually get on the training ground, impart your philosophy, develop as a manager yourself. But the club has to have a plan around him. And I think that's where you see a Patrick Vieira leaves. I think Dome Trant took over right at the time.
Yeah.
Was able to continue to push forward. I mean, New York City has gone through managers over and over, right?
Yeah. For
different various reasons. But they've been able to at least keep some sort of continuity, have a trophy, of course, MLS Cup to show for it. So it's even more important if you are going to attract a manager of this profile that you have to have a system around it, and that was clearly missing.
The name you said 6 months ago, they were interested in hiring Ricardo Moreira, who we were just talking about, part of the
get a lot of mentions
Orlando City. I mean, that is a name to keep in mind for this offseason. I think for multiple openings. We'll be talking more about DC United, obviously, as we head into the offseason. We'll be talking a lot more about Orlando City in the weeks to come. Right now, we're talking about Minnesota United, still alive in the Western Conference playoffs. A huge 5-2 win over the LA Galaxy. Timu Puki scored a poker. Thank you to producer Maria for teaching me that term. That is a Spanish term for 4 goals. Better term for it than Rob Stone's ham bone.
What do they say in Iceland?
Hambone's pretty good.
Oh, Finland. Is he
Finland.
Finland?
He's
Finland.
Finnish.
Yeah,
He's
sorry.
Finnish, yeah. Scandinavia is all just one country. This comes on the heels of, I think, much more shocking news about a coach leaving. Adrian Heath was dismissed prior to this weekend with 2 games to go. This was one of, this caught me really off guard because the understanding around the league was that Adrian had the ear of that ownership group. He had a lot of rope. I will also say that there's a strong analytics case for keeping. There was a strong analytics case for keeping Adrian into next year. Like going into this weekend, Minnesota, their expected goals differential was +7, which is, I think it was 7th in the entire league. Going by American Soccer Analysis, their goals added metric, Minnesota's a little worse. They were 5th in the West. Goals added it measures essentially match control, and that's not really Minnesota's game. But even by that metric, they were 5th in the Western Conference. Just watching them, that tracks. They played, I think, a lot of effective soccer this year up until they got into the box. And it's kind of fitting that the moment after the manager was let go for his forwards not scoring enough, Timu Pukki gifts this team with a lifeline, 5-2, scores 4. I'll just ask you, were you surprised by this? And would you have done it? Because Adrian Heath, not technically the sporting director, but he was the guy calling the shots. Mark Watson, who was formerly Adrian Heath's assistant, became the sporting director. Mark Watson was also let go.
Yeah. First, I will say positive regression to the mean was also aided by playing the LA Galaxy. And this
the Galaxy's defense does that.
Yeah. So that probably helped. I'm sure it's probably when Adrian Heath and Mark was, come on, man. One more game, it was against LA.
Pukki would like to play them every week.
If Adrian Heath was going to be let go at the end of the year, wouldn't be surprised. Get it, probably the end of the cycle. A little bit disappointing. Though they made the playoffs each of the last 4 years, they had struggled to take that next step. And this season, again, the underlying numbers were good, but at the end of the day, I would have understood, would have made sense to move on. I was shocked that they didn't give him the last 2 games. This is their only manager ever in MLS play. He's been there for 7 years. He's very well regarded, not obviously at the club, like you said, with the owner and the staff. He's really well respected around the league. He kind of does a lot in terms of reaching out with other managers and keep maintaining relationships and stuff. If 7 years at a club and being the only manager and having this great reputation as for your character wise, if that doesn't buy you getting to finish out the last 2 games of the season, what does? So I feel for Adrian Heath in that regard. And again,
I agree with just to hop in from a player's perspective. What does that tell you when they let go of the manager with 2 games left and you still have a chance at making the playoffs? For me, that says, all right, season's over. Wrap it up. Get ready for next year, whatever. And the team obviously came out and responded in a different way. But it's also, exactly what you mentioned. Just as you're saying on the one side, the Galaxy are, a regression to, I don't know. I don't know.
They did not teach math at Cal.
Yeah. Beating the Galaxy is one thing, 5-2, but also losing to LAFC midweek on the road when your team is run down. They're going DJ Taylor and Bristow. It's just a difficult matchup going up against Belonga, a team. Yeah, I understand they had come in and hadn't scored goals, but that team has weapons. So that felt strange to me. And so I agree with you on the timing part of saying, what kind of message does this send to the team? Why not wait?
What kind of message did the team send to the ownership with that 5-1 loss? Right.
Well, they looked like they gave up, right? Yeah. And that's what was the other manager who lost? There's been so many managers got fired this year, but there was another big loss earlier where
it was Gio.
Yeah. And where it was similar. It was in Houston, right? And you could say it was the Heat, and Houston was on fire, but still, I think there is something about it where it makes it a little bit easier to say goodbye right at that point in time. But the part for me is that's the type of game where you just throw that away and you say, okay, we're still in this. We have a chance to make the playoffs. They're going to Sporting Kansas City on the last day with a chance to get to the playoffs. And if he makes a run, does that make it harder for him to get let go later on? So I just think the timing of this for me also, I think you can make some arguments against Adrian Heath. For me, it was ironic. It was an away match because that's where they've been so good.
Yeah.
If you want to make a critique, it's that the home form this year has not been good enough. 4-9-4 at home with that crowd, that environment there. Like, they should be much better. Also, the way that they have conceded goals from winning positions is also disappointing. I found it ironic, or maybe not ironic, that it was they score in the first 3 minutes, concede 2 minutes later, and then end up going completely the other direction. So, I mean, I made the case last extra time that I was on last week about, you know, it being the most disappointing team to miss the playoffs. I was assuming that they were done. They're still in the mix, you know, up until this point. But I think the harder part is saying that this back half of the season, after surviving without Reynoso, that's where it didn't. That's where, when you had all of the pieces, you have Pukki, you have Hlongwane, you have all these guys healthy, and it still wasn't good enough. That's where I see, okay, maybe you can critique to say that's where things had plateaued or they weren't able to hit that next level.
And then Adrian Heath, as a sporting director, takes a hit because it took them so long to put together this roster that we think is actually pretty good. We will get into the Western Conference playoff permutations and Eastern Conference on the next show. We have like 3 more shows to come before we actually get to decision day. So we'll talk more about how Minnesota is alive. They do not control their own destiny. It's Dallas and San Jose who control their own destiny in the West, but they are still alive. Assuming that it's not just status quo now, where an interim takes over and holds on, what kind of coach do they go for from here? Do they go for a coach with the sort of the vision of a sporting director, like the double authority responsibility of sporting director and head coach, or do you split it up?
I mean, I would go to any club and say split it up. Yeah. I think the days of the only reason I think it's done otherwise is because you want the coach so bad that you'll say, okay, well, what's it going to take?
Yeah,
and they're like, oh, I don't want anybody above me to, you know, be manipulating what I want to do with the team. I want full control. But the teams that are most successful have that connection and continuity between, you look at Cincinnati, right? Mm-hmm. Chris Albright and Pat Noonan. There is an understanding, there's a mutual respect, and you don't feel like somebody's looking over your shoulder trying to like snake you for the job, which is what I've seen a lot of times in the earlier eras of MLS. And I think to this day, it's something managers are concerned about, is saying, well, either you're going to push me out to save your own skin, or you're going to try to step down and take the job myself, which is, you know, something that's just not a good place to be in. But I would say you have to go to get 2 different people for these positions. But from a manager's perspective, I don't know the sporting director side, but the 2 managers we mentioned earlier, Gio Savarese and Oscar Pareja, would be top of my list as far as people we know within the MLS ecosystem that have head coaching experience that you could maybe entice and say, hey, we've got a Reynoso in his prime right now. Look at the pieces around him. It's competitive. I mean, I still think this is a team that, if they found a way into the playoffs, could, you know, potentially get an upset. That Western Conference is pretty open. I see a much bigger chance of, you know, these late arriving teams into the playoffs being able to hurt somebody as opposed to in the Eastern Conference. But yeah, those would be the first 2 names of managers that jump off the list for me.
Pareja makes sense for me too, particularly. And again, this is difficult to even consider because the world of soccer is so huge. Like in NFL, NBA, you pretty much know who all the candidates are, right? Yeah. Like here, they could go off the board. So it's easier to talk about the candidates we know. So again, they could have a coaching search that goes to Europe and South America, and maybe they pull somebody that we hadn't heard of before. But in terms of the people that we know, again, Oscar Pareja, I think, would be the popular answer for just about any of these.
Orlando fans are going to absolutely hate this show. Absolutely hate this show.
I think that he makes a little bit more sense for this job than Gio, but like I was saying,
does he? Because there's no academy system that's built out in Minnesota.
Well, that's if you want to.
It would be starting from scratch. Whereas if he stays in Orlando, or if he goes to DC, or whoever else has an opening, like Minnesota have one of the worst academy setups in MLS right now.
So I was saying from the Minnesota perspective. Sorry, there was a beeping going on in the hallway. I don't really know what that was.
You heard that too. I thought that was
yeah. We all looked at each other. Sorry, I was saying it from the Minnesota perspective. If they were going out and building this, like again, like you said, like I think Orlando's a better situation for Pareja.
Right.
I think that there are other sides, but if you're Minnesota, I think you start with Pareja, and Gio kind of maybe parallel, but like if you had to pick one. But again, like you said, if I was Pareja, like I don't know. Like they would have to sell it to me as, we want you to build out this academy. We need you to do this, and then maybe that entices it more. But again, like that's the easy kind of top candidate.
So if you're hearing a little bit of beeping, this is not your device. And if you're hearing a voice of impending doom, this is not your device. This is this podcast. The building we are in right now is doing a monthly scheduled test of the fire notification system.
Are we sure it's a test?
We'll find out. It'd probably be good for ratings.
We will go right through it, man. We're that dedicated to the content. This game officially eliminated the LA Galaxy. We're going to be quick on this because we will talk more about the Galaxy in the weeks and months to come. Riqui Puig missed this game with an ankle injury. They were a disaster defensively. It is a disastrous season. A massive failure of a season. And it's been almost a decade now since the Galaxy have been relevant at the top of it feels more like last year, where they were so good in the second half of the year and then made that run to the Western semifinals and then really pushed LAFC. It feels like that was an aberration now, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been nightmare after nightmare. It started at the beginning of the season, all the turmoil, fan protest. Then Chris Klein steps away or, departs the club. And then you end up having, Chicharito injured. And, that's really been the biggest part for me, has just been the rash of injuries that have continued through the team. It's gone all the way through Brugman, Jalen Neal, Cáceres, Caligari, like all over the pitch.
That's like 5 or 6 starters right there.
Yeah, and then Riqui Puig right down the stretch when they're, at least trying to make a push. And defensively, it's the same old stories. That's been the biggest problem. It's just been horrible defending time and time again, which we've seen pop up all over the pitch. And I think part of it is the personnel, the way that Vanny wants to play. He wants attacking pieces, but the pieces that he has on the pitch have to be protected, and they don't have the pieces that are able to do that. So they end up going into these situations where even with a full strength lineup with Chicharito and all these guys, it was going to be a shootout. They were going to have to win, 4-3 or 5-3, which is fun for like an El Tráfico every time, you want to go out there and see what happens, but not enough if you want to be consistently challenging for, frankly, just the playoffs for this team, which have been out of reach. So I think personally, like with Vanny's situation, I know that if you would have told me at the beginning of the season that with everything going on, that there would be 8 managers gone in Major League Soccer and Greg Vanny wouldn't be one of them and they would be eliminated from the playoffs, I would have been shocked. But I think because of the way that this season has gone with all the injuries, everything I mentioned, and Chris Klein leaving, I feel like that is in some ways, it's like, what do you want from me?
Yeah, and they had the sanctions during the summer window, remember?
And I thought they handled those well.
They did.
I thought they made some good moves to bring in some different players, Cerrillo, different guys that I thought, Yoshida, although the back line hasn't been great, but it's like, even the like Billy Sharp one, they're like, all right, throw our hands up, we talked about rolling the dice. Like, it's a short term. It's not hamstringing them looking ahead. And that's where I start to say, okay, well, Chicharito at the end of the season, seems like he's not coming back. They're gonna need a new big name striker. You look at the way Inter Miami is making moves. LA Galaxy invented that.
Yeah.
So you would expect them to go out and make a big move, right? A big move from a player perspective. You have to get pieces around them. It's not going to just be one. I think they have to build out a number of different positions. But for me, I think Greg Vanny, if it were up to me, which I know it's not, but this is our show, at least until the place burns down around us. This is like what it feels like to be in the Galaxy. Sorry.
The building is on fire and there is no escape.
And we're in the middle of it saying, that's all right.
I had to take that shot,
Vanny is the sporting director as well as head coach officially. Jovan Kirovski, who is a holdover from the Chris Klein era, he's still the technical director. They brought in Will Kuntz back in April. He is the senior VP of player personnel. Will Kuntz has a lot of history in this league. Back when Tim Bezbachenko left MLS HQ to take over the job at Toronto, Will Kuntz took Bez's old job. Then he went to LAFC, was in the front office there. He's more of a cap manager guy than a go out and scout and have the final say on the signings. I'm sure he was essential to what they did this summer in getting guys from within the league. It was Fagundes, Cerrillo, Michael Barrios, and then going and getting Billy Sharp on a free. And Billy Sharp was excellent for this team down the stretch. Galaxy still have another game or two, but they're out. Is this brain trust? Do we expect this brain trust to still be in place this winter when the window opens?
I mean, it's difficult. Again, like, I think so. Even in the sense of, so Chris Klein left, and so technically it would have been his call. The new president, I believe, is like focused just on business.
Mm-hmm.
So would Vanny have to fire himself? Like who? Like, I believe that that's what the structure is. And again, like, I think that there's merits to saying, like, the avenue I took here was just logistically, but I do think that there is merits to, like Calen was saying with the injuries, that, hey, like, maybe does deserve another year, another whatever, all of this. So I'm just looking at it from a logistical standpoint.
It's not even deserve. It's just just how much do you want to break? Like, do you want to just start all over the project a time and time again? We talked about how that creates dysfunction in organizations, and I think you have different pieces you can change, right? You mentioned they bring in Will Kuntz. I think building a more of a robust system around them, and that was part of the issue. I think before was like it felt like a few old friends, doing work together, and now it's like, oh no, we don't have a full scouting department. Now they're staffing up behind the scenes to do that. So I think the idea that it would take some of that off the plate, and then you don't have to change everything. But that was just my opinion.
Also, so go ahead, Tom.
I was just gonna say too that, like, in terms of if you wanted to break it again or do whatever, like, Chicharito's out of contract, Douglas Costa is out of contract. That's 2 DP spots. They were pretty good at, again, their summer moves. Fagundes and Maya Yoshida are the only ones guaranteed after this season in players that they brought in. So they do have a ton of flexibility this offseason. So it's what the decision now, like, you can't, if you have a bad start to 2024, be really bad to start making changes. So it's either do it now or, hey, like, we're going to give them a leash again to make sure that we're not just constantly changing. But they were they thought that they had a really strong chance at Chucky Lozano. He was going to be a free agent next summer. He ends up going to PSV. They were like, if the transfer window closes in Europe on, like, September 1st, whatever day it was, it's like, if he's still at Napoli, I think we're going to sign him.
Yeah.
Like, so they were legitimately towards the end. So, like, that's the kind of name and player that you need to think of with these 2 DP spots. Like, this team could change overnight. There's a lot of good foundational pieces. I know that we've argued about Maya Yoshida or not, but, like, the way that Vanny wants to play, I think that's a very good center back for them. Gaston Brugman is a very good player. That's a very good number 6. Ricky Pooch is obviously one of the best 10s in the league.
Maya Yoshida, 36 next year.
Yeah,
Gaston Brugman, 32, coming off a significant injury.
Yeah. No, and again, that's fair. And, like, because it could, like, some of the other signings, like Caligari, I thought was very good as a starter, but
coming off an ACL.
But he won't even be back until midseason.
Jalen
Neal. I don't think his timeline is quite so extended, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's
but anyway, like, it's easy to cherry pick the best DPs in the league. Be like, oh, why can't they just sign Gazdag and Carranza like the Union did, and, like, kind of go the best case scenario for every team? But, like, even if they hit on one of the 2 DPs that they bring in,
they have to hit on both.
Yeah, they have to. But, like, even if they hit on one, this team gets much, much better. So, like, it's not that far off, as crazy it sounds, for a team that's given up more goals than anyone in MLS.
Tom does the watchability rankings. I think the off-season watchability rankings, I think the Galaxy go into the off-season number 1 because
I like this bit.
As
I think I'm gonna take it as an article idea. You can.
Because as Calen said, what Miami did this year, the Galaxy invented that, and they have a lot of flexibility this winter to go out and get more. We'll talk a lot more about the Galaxy. We will talk a lot more about Inter Miami, officially out after a 1-0 loss to SC Cincinnati. Miami painted the post 3 or 4 times in the first half. Messi made his return, came on in the 55th minute, played 35. Was not great, did not look sharp, but did not look injured. Looked a little pissed off at Santi Arias, which I enjoyed. Matt Miazga got involved because that's what he does. Jordi Alba still out. Now, the way we're going to evaluate this Miami season sometime in the next couple shows. We we're kind of running out of time for that. The way it sets up, so we're just going to do this very quickly. Lionel Messi is leaving to go on international duty with Argentina. He's probably already on a plane. He's probably already there. They have 2 games. These are World Cup qualifiers. Lionel Messi does not miss World Cup qualifiers for Argentina unless he is severely injured. I think he will play in both. Then they come in. Miami has 2 games left. As said, they are eliminated from the playoffs. Even if they take 6 points from these 2 games, they are still out. They're playing a Charlotte team that desperately needs points from these games. That is a setup. We will get into more of that in the coming, in the next show, probably in next Monday's show. We will, I'm sure, talk more about that. I just want from you guys really quick thoughts on this Miami season overall.
It's felt like 4 seasons. I can't even. They didn't even seem like the same team. It feels like a full on. If I'm going back to doing their game against New York City, the second game of the season, that feels like 10 years ago at this point. I mean, Drake Callender stood on his head that day, which stood out, which I think more people got to see as the season went on. But there was some struggles as well too, where Phil Neville was playing a ton of these young players at once, and as good as we see Kremovsky is now towards later season, it wasn't smooth sailing the entire way. And it wasn't a smooth sailing for any of these players, especially the young guys early on. I think they got valuable minutes, got to develop. But ultimately, once the big guns came in, that's when they were able to really find their best. So, strange, disappointing middle section, but there was a lot going on behind the scenes, a ton of injuries. Gregory, of course, went out. Jean Mota, some big pieces that were helping them. And then, Leagues Cup was insane. Dream, I think, just for the sport, period. It was just...
It's the most magical thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was like the Leagues Cup for me. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be interesting. Like Liga MX against MLS. And then you're like, wait, what is this? So it was just amazing. So I think Inter Miami have given us huge moments, and the league a huge shot in the arm as well too. So it was amazing to see, but then ultimately it felt like ran out of gas right in the end, which you can understand. And they went all the way, US Open Cup final, ran into a juggernaut. No, you can't really complain going against Houston. Who's going to beat them? But yeah, it felt like so many different seasons, and this last one I think was just out of gas.
Yeah, really quick, Tom. What changes do we expect to see from Miami, this roster this offseason?
The good news is they're going to do stuff. They're going to do plenty, I'm sure. They don't really.
They're finally out from under sanctions.
Yeah,
by the way,
yeah.
This is it. This is the first window they've had in a long time where they have the full kitty.
Yeah. Just Gregory coming back from injury, and he fits so perfectly with Busquets and Messi, and that. The perfect kind of investment that you would make around those players, and he'll be back. And that alone is going to be a phenomenal new signing, air quote, like a new signing. Outside of that, Joseph Martinez, I think it's an option, whatever it is. He's not on a guaranteed contract for next year. So that could free up some more significant space. Luis Suarez reworked his deal with Gremio. He's a free agent. That's going to be one to watch again. And then you just kind of think they're connected with any big name free agent. I think that Chris Henderson in that front office is too smart to do that. Eden Hazard keeps on getting floated out. Yeah. Harvey Neville, I think, would be a better right winger than Eden Hazard at this stage of his career. And Harvey Neville's on loan, and he's a right back, right? So I don't know. I don't think that they'll fall into those traps like they kind of did with Blaise Matuidi in the past. So long-winded way of saying, I don't think that you're going to see a ton of these big names. I do think Suarez is going to come, or somebody like that. But it's not just going to be a parade of a bunch of older dudes. And this team is going to be awesome next year. Again, because they fit so well with Gregory coming back and Alba being fit again. DeAndre Yedlin, I think, is the perfect right back for this team. And if you're going to spend a lot of money on a right back, he's kind of the guy and the exact profile you would want with this team. So there's just so much that I like from this group. Their biggest need, I think, if they sort kind of center forward like that, is a consistent secondary chance creator. That's been the most glaring need without Messi. And obviously there is no Messi replacement. But Facundo Farias, it's a little bit much to ask for him to be and maybe he is that answer.
He's disappointed, I thought.
Yeah, I thought particularly without Messi, he hasn't been that good. But But again, he's a U22 initiative signing. And like, so maybe he is that answer. But whatever it is, they need to have it, whether it's internal or externally. That's, I think, the biggest addition.
I also think more time with Tata. If you think with just him with a full preseason, being able to not just pick up his team and have to turn it around. Like we saw a progression from the beginning of Leagues Cup to the end. And I think about him with time with the team and what that could look like.
Yeah. I wrote my postmortem that's up on the website already for Inter Miami. One thing that struck me is that they just have too much quality in midfield for too few spots. They could do some wheeling and dealing within Gregory, Jean Mota, Dixon Arroyo. They're not going to trade, Benjamin Kremovsky or David Ruiz, who was really good, the Honduran American international. But like they could get some GAM incoming from those guys. If they flip Leo Campana to open up a DP slot, like they could get $3 million, $3.5 million worth of GAM. I would open up the checkbooks for him if I was another MLS team. They're going to be a fascinating team. They did sign Kamal Miller to a long-term contract this past week. That is a great move. And like another check of like just completely winning that trade by Chris Henderson. He had a fantastic year. I think Calen's right. It felt like 4 different seasons. What they did sets them up to be one of the juggernauts, one of the big teams heading into 2024. We'll talk a lot more about
Would you put them as favorites? It have to be, right?
Yep.
Can we play 2023 MLS Cup first?
Sure. Not playing in MLS Cup 2023. Austin. They were eliminated in that 4-2 loss to LAFC at home, and LAFC usually stinks in Texas, but not this time. They crushed the Verde. Sporting director Rodolfo Borrell, remember, he was hired from City Football Group. He'd been with Pep Guardiola at Barcelona and Bayern Munich for a long time. Huge profile in the World Game. He announced that Josh Wolff will return as the club's head coach for the 2024 season. Quote, Josh is a very good young head coach, and although the results this year are disappointing, we're fortunate to have a coach with his level of commitment and knowledge. I'm confident he is the right leader for this team. I was surprised by this. What I will say is a person of Borrell's stature in the World Game does not come take a job as a sporting director or GM if he is not allowed to pick his own coach. So I think that Josh Wolff must have impressed him. I think that makes some sense because if you think Wolff is a Greg Berhalter disciple, and Greg Berhalter's system is positional play based upon the City Football Group blueprint. I mean, that is it's like a straight line there to Borrell. And so from that perspective, it makes sense. The bigger news, I think, is that they are really staffing up their scouting department, which also makes sense because the previous front office, their plan was to like sign this one particular agent's clients time after time after time.
Dominguez and
Rodney Redis, a few others.
Johan Romagna.
Oh my goodness!
I gotta get in touch with this guy.
Right, get you back out in the field, dude. Well, Austin doesn't need fullbacks, but they need just about everything else. I think this is a team we're going to see a massive overhaul and rebuild this offseason. RSL, as I mentioned up at the top, Brian Vera scored a banger. They also got one from Jefferson Savarino in about the 90th minute. That was not enough. They lost 3-2 to Sporting Kansas City. RSL still control their own destiny in terms of home field advantage in the Western Conference. Sporting Kansas City do not control their own destiny. However, they do host Minnesota United on decision day. If they win that, they give themselves a decent shot at making the playoffs. They're still alive, which is kind of remarkable considering where they were at the start of the season. Big news, though, for RSL. Chicho Arango was injured in this game, came off. He was crying. He was crying on the bench. We don't know the extent of the injury at this point, but we wish him all the best. He is one of those players who's so much fun to watch in the postseason. Do we think that Sporting Kansas City have a shot? They host Minnesota on decision day. The way it plays out right now, San Jose hosts Austin. San Jose are in control of their own destiny, currently in 8th place on 43 points. And Dallas have 2 games left. They host Colorado, and then they go to LA on decision day. Those are the 2 teams in control. Like, one of those teams would have to face plant pretty badly for Sporting to get in.
Yeah. San Jose at home against Austin sounds sounds like a
That
good
sounds like
spot.
3 points. for
Yeah. And then 2 games for Dallas
Dallas.
gives you a little wiggle
you.
room.
Dallas have lost once in 3 months.
Right.
They're not winning a lot of
Yeah, I
games.
was gonna say,
but, like, they've lost once in 3 months. All right, San Jose. Speaking of San Jose, we have a subject header that Anders titled "Calen Analyzes for the Fans."
Oh, God.
The Quakes went to Dallas. They got a 1-1 draw. Sam Moan Lewin hit Weeby in the Instagram DMs. My Instagram is closed. My Instagram is not open to the riffraff. Apparently, Weeby lives a different life. Hey, man. Perennially ignored San Jose fan here. Wow, way to set the tone. Was wondering if you guys might give a brief assessment of Luchi's first season at the helm. I think turning last season's Quakes into a playoff team this year is a massive accomplishment, but certain elements of the season have been underwhelming. Where do y'all land on San Jose, their potential playoff outlook, and the broader project that Luchi laid a foundation for this season? And I'm going to remind Sam and all of you that San Jose are not officially a playoff team yet. If they beat Austin, they will be in the playoffs. But for that the San Jose team all year long, it's a big if. They don't win a lot of games, Calen.
Sorry, I just love the idea that like Weeby's on vacation at some beach right now, and he's gonna open up his Instagram and be like,
He's been texting me all show, dude.
It's
he's gonna see a
0%
DM
surprising.
that goes, "Hey man, perennially ignored San Jose fan here."
And Weeby's like, this is perfect.
And
This
he's
is
like,
exactly
"Thank God,
what I
I'm
want
waiting
with
for
my
this."
Vino Verde.
Watch the oh man, that's amazing. Yeah, no, I think it's been very positive. If I were a San Jose fan, I'd be feeling very positive this season. They were in last place, I think, in the Western Conference at the end of last year. This was, I think, a big part of that was because Almada was kind of a nightmare as far as his tactics and the way he set up this team. Just Almeida, yeah, sorry. Did not give them any a real chance to just have a success. And they had some nice pieces because I thought the front office has done a good job bringing in some nice pieces. Bobasi, Montero, a number of guys, and then now Luchi comes in. Carrezo is added to the team. Espinoza has been good. So, but it's really been more, I would say it hasn't been really high octane attack the way I thought it was going to be, or the way we saw windows of that to begin the season. It's been much more pragmatic, which is maybe boring for a San Jose perspective, but I think winning is better, right? Like a San Jose team before was more fun, maybe got into crazier games. This is more what we saw last weekend. It's good defending, really good goalkeeping from Daniel, and then timely goal scoring from Bobasi. So I think that's a recipe for success. The one thing I would say is to really take the next step forward, they have to spend, and they haven't gone out and really done that to get. If you look at the Western Conference, or just the league in general right now, if you really want to not just be hovering around the playoff line, are we in, are we out, decision day heroics, that's been kind of like a hallmark of San Jose. If they really want to take the next step, you go get a Hector Herrera, you go get players that can really make a difference. And it's not just, we're seeing now, it's not just the traditionally big money spending teams of Miami and, LA Galaxy, etc. It's now Houston, RSL. Mm-hmm. There are teams that are Philadelphia. There are teams that are doing this. It doesn't always equate to success, as we've seen with Toronto FC, the highest spending teams and wooden spoon winners. So it's not just spend. You have to spend smartly. But I think the San Jose team with Luchi has a really good base. So I'd be feeling pretty positive, but also a little bit hesitant as far as what's our ceiling.
Tom. This year under Luchi Gonzalez, 1.3 points per game. Last year under Alex Cavello, who took over for Almeida after Almeida had that disastrous 6-7 game start to the season, 1.3 points per game. Has there actually been a step forward for this group?
I do think so, because this is more sustainable than last year. And again, Luchi, with his background and everything that he does with player development, I know Alex Cavello was the second team manager, so he was doing player development as well. This, and I'm going to steal your point that I know that you've made a bunch of times, even going back to Luchi at Dallas. It's the finishing patterns, the final third stuff that is still stagnant. And that is all the more highlighted when you're not spending $6 million on a winger, right? Like Christian Espinosa has been very good. Jeremy Bobasi's been very good. Jamiro Montero has been good. Those like Christian Espinosa is probably the only one that's maybe like top 5 in his position, maybe above OC is, but you know what I mean? That this isn't, if those finishing patterns aren't going to be right, you need kind of some of these individual talents. Danny Bouanga. Again, Christian Espinosa is that. I don't want to be dismissive of him, but it's not the perfect combination.
Cade Cowell's supposed to be that?
Supposed to be. I think he feels like he's destined to left wing back at this stage, but I don't actually know that or think that. But his physical profile is going to get him on the field no matter what.
Yeah.
And like one day that might happen. But for right now, because he hasn't taken that step forward. So yeah, the point that Calen made about the ceiling, that's it. Like the floor, I think Luchi Gonzalez is high, and that's very good. I hold Luchi in pretty high regard. I think that was a really good hire. But the ceiling, I was hoping to see more in those final third patterns. I was hoping to see more in terms of, again, a step forward for Cade Cowell, particularly under Luchi. And that hasn't quite happened. Again, this sounds all negative, doom and gloom. If they don't fumble the bag and make the playoffs, great achievement for this team and where they've been, and kind of, I guess, how bleak things were at the beginning of last year and most of last year. Like, they were resigned to not making the playoffs in April of last year. It does not happen very much in MLS just because that's how big the hole was and that's how little hope there was. So again, like, overall, positive season. We're a little bit worried about the next step.
It's not a positive season if they don't close it out by winning on decision day.
Absolutely.
And again, if they miss the playoffs at this point, it is a lost, disastrous season.
Yes. And that shapes the tenor of the offseason, that shapes everything else in a negative light. So again, if they do indeed get this result on decision day and get into the playoffs again, even if they lose in the play-in round, like, whatever it is, like, that's a step forward for this team, and you need to take these little steps, or this, I think, would be a pretty big one for them. But it's not about, you can't recreate what Cincy did. Like, you just can't expect that of anybody. So making the playoffs would be a good step, and then you look forward to next year.
All right. We're not going to talk about Dallas. They got a point at home. We have mentioned that they have 2 games left. They do control their own date. Or their own fate. They don't lose a lot these days. They don't win a lot either. Figuring out a secondary goal scorer. Both these teams will head into the offseason, and we'll talk about them. Won't they use all their DP slots? Like, that is going to be the talk for both of these teams. There might be some talk as well about selling players on, but that'll be for another show. We're going to wrap up this show by talking about the East Playoff Roundup. Montreal had a absolute must-win at home against the Timbers to stay alive. They crushed them. 4-1. That puts Montreal up into 8th place on 41 points. Their decision day game, they traveled down to Columbus. Montreal's terrible on the road. Columbus are going to be seeing red, given that they left points on the board yet again this weekend with a late breakdown.
Wait a minute. Also, Wilfred Nancy?
Yeah, the Wilfred
Nancy. With a chance to put out Montreal on the last day.
And remember, last month, Columbus went up to Montreal, and Montreal's pretty good at home, and smacked them 4-2, and that could have been 8-2. Yep. Like, that was a big one.
I got my eye on that one.
Montreal could back into the playoffs, but the Red Bulls have woken from their long slumber. They've won 3 out of 4. They beat Toronto FC 3-0 this weekend. Charlotte FC, Chicago, your beloved Chicago Fire, Calen. Midweek.
Yeah, I was like, man, was I a little too hard on them after the Miami game? Calling it a disaster, nightmare season, I think is what I said. And the vibes were really so positive, and I celebrate.
I was praising the Chicago Fire.
You did, and I was like, wait a minute.
We cannot have that on Extra Time.
You know better than this, Doyle. And then I turned on my phone after the Red Bull game and saw the result. Yeah, and the way too as well, with like the way they conceded. Charlotte have not been good on the road. Credit to them for sure, but just so disappointing from the Fire perspective to go back. And that's the thing. It's like in a big match, maybe when you have a sold out crowd and you have all that, then you get the best Shaqiri and you say, here we go. And then you look back in the next game and it's completely flat. So yeah, disappointing for Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that has to be considered one of the most disappointing, maybe the single most disappointing result of the season for any team, because they were coming off a record crowd. They had a good crowd again this weekend. It was their final home game of the season. they had a chance to take control of that Eastern Conference playoff race, and they just gave it to Charlotte. They're like, you guys have it. And if you look at, like, I watched too much film of that game, the lack of defense up the gut for Chicago in that particular game, it was night and day from the Miami game. Like, they got after him. Like, Shaqiri was defending. Gaston Jimenez high-pressed Chicago to the fourth goal in that game. Charlotte were able to walk into the midfield time and time again. And as soon as you do that, you force the opposing team to change their shape, to scramble. Chicago scrambles really poorly because several of their high-paid players do not scramble at all. So everybody else is doing the work of 1.5 people. And that's how you give away a playoff spot. And now Chicago, who is their final game against? They go to NYCFC. So this is a 6-pointer on decision day. Again, one of these teams is guaranteed to pass DC United. That would not be enough in and of itself. They would need to get some help, because Charlotte, with those 2 games against Miami, if Charlotte wins out, they're on 45 points. If they take 4 points from it, they are on 43 points. They would have, I believe they would have the tiebreaker. Well, it's too much. We'll sort that out before. There we go. And of course, the Red Bulls breathed life into their season. They've won 3 out of 4. They go to Nashville on decision day. What is going on differently for the Red Bulls other than ball go in?
It's pretty much that. And again, we talking about regression to the mean. Luquinhas looked like a DP again for the first time
year and a
against
half.
Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto. Yeah.
I don't think that was a coincidence.
Yeah.
So.
We're happy for Montreal. We're happy for those fans. They got a show in that game. It was Losada ball in that it was very hard tackling, very vertical, very direct, and got themselves a banger from Matthew Chanier. That was for David Goss.
He felt he woke, whatever time zone he was in, whatever time it was, I know that he woke up or jolted to life like, it happened.
But that's why I'm excited about this decision day match between them and Columbus, because it's a clash of managers with a lot to prove. There's the history, of course, with Wilfred Nancy going against his former side. It's a clash of philosophies of style, where one team likes to go direct and vertical, and I think we saw that with Opoku being able to get in behind with that early goal. And, Montreal have done a really good job of remaking the team in Losada's image to allow him to bring in some pieces to have that sort of pace and ability to kind of stretch the field the way they do. And then Columbus on the other side is a team that has been keeping the ball really well, one of the best attacking teams, but it conceded late, so they're going to be frustrated. And, I think that's going to make them extra motivated. But I still think this Montreal team it's dangerous because they are so good at home. I think they have 10 wins on the season at home, but have not been good at all on the road.
2-12-2.
Yeah.
And there's something like minus 35 goal differential.
And that's some of that for me comes with it being a very young team without a lot of leadership, because you look around also on that roster and even the players with experience, Wanyama not really playing as the same role that we've seen them play in the past.
Not really playing.
No, not playing. So I think that's a part of it. But I will say when it comes to playoff time, and right now decision day is the playoffs to me. And I think unless you're that bad that you can't actually compete on this last day and it's meaningless. But it is a playoff, and I tend in the playoffs, and especially in a one-off, which this is single elimination, is to throw out the regular season home and away records, at least the away records. I think the home teams that hold serve for the most part. But I think a team, if you haven't been great on the road or whatever, there's something different that happens when you get to the playoffs where you can hit one game. You just need to hit one to be able to make it happen. So I still give this Montreal team a puncher's chance here, and they've done a good job, I think, coming in with that confidence as well, coming in that last home game.
I think it's more likely that Columbus wins by 3 or more goals than it is that Montreal even get a point.
I think so too, but I enjoyed that reading from the book of Dom Kinnear. That'll be it for this show. Thank you guys for joining us. As always, thank you, Tom, for being here. Thank you, Calen, for being here. It's good to see you both again in person. Shout out to Andrew and David. I hope you guys are getting plenty of sunshine, R&R, and enjoyment being away from this burning building. We will see you all on Wednesday, folks. Take care.